On TSN Insider Trading a few days ago, Darren Dreger laid the hammer. And he said that the Battle of Alberta may drift off the ice as well, because the Edmonton Oilers are also looking for a top 6 forward. Not sure about the Flames, but he believes the Oilers are going to pay close attention to what happens with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Again, speculation around the likes of Kasperi Kapanen, Andreas Johnsson, and maybe Alex Kerfoot. Here are 5 reasons why the Edmonton Oilers would be interested in these Maple Leafs forwards. The first reason we have over here is cap space availability for the Edmonton Oilers. The Oilers currently have $900,000 in cap space, and they're set to having a few extra million coming off the books. Sam Gagner is making $3.15 million. Yeah, I know. He's expiring at the end of the year. Zach Kassian, while they're working on a contract extension, he's currently making just under $2 million, and the Oilers do have a few other players coming off the books as well. Josh Archibald is making $1 million. Gaetan Haas is making just under $1 million. Joakim Nygard is in that same situation. A few of these guys are on their ELCs, and they most likely won't see a huge pay raise. But if you go over onto their other players that they do have, Mike Smith is expiring at the end of the year. He's making $2 million. On the IR, you have Matthew Benning making $1.9 million expiring at the end of the year. Brandon Manning is expiring. He's making just over $1 million. So from a cap perspective, the Oilers are set to losing about maybe potentially even $6 or $7 million next year. And each of these 3 Toronto forwards are just making over $3 million for the next few years. From a cap management point of view on the Oilers side, acquiring one of these guys does make sense. Reason number 2 why the Edmonton Oilers would want to acquire one of these 3 Toronto forwards is the cap space scarcity on the Toronto side of things. I don't need to explain this one. The Leafs have $0 in cap space right now, and you know what I'm talking about. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The Leafs are in a weird situation with their cap. They have 3 players over $10 million, and things aren't looking too great going into the long term if they remain with the team they have now. Kyle Dubas, he needs to press some buttons. He needs to pull some strings, and he needs to fix this cap situation, because they're right up against the cap, and everybody knows that. That's not something that I need to go super in-depth with. The third reason as to why the Edmonton Oilers would want to go after one of these 3 Toronto Maple Leafs forwards is the forward support. This to me is one of the most important aspects to taking a look at why a team would want a player. Because Kasperi Kapanen, let's just use him as an example. Is Kasperi Kapanen an upgrade over, I don't know, Alex Chiasson? Yeah, I would probably say so. Is Kerfoot an upgrade over Chiasson? I know he's a center, but I'd say so too. Same with Andreas Johnsson. The points kind of are a little bit misleading because Andreas Johnsson does have 16 points, Kerfoot does have 18 points, and Kasperi Kapanen has the most out of the bunch with 28. Kapanen would be tied with Zach Kassian on this Oilers team if he was on this Oilers team. But the thing is, Kasperi Kapanen, to me, is a much significant upgrade over some of the other wingers that the Edmonton Oilers have in their system right now. In terms of the centers, just assume Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl play on that first line together. You have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins on that second line. You can maybe even move him to the wing, have an Alex Kerfoot on your second line. I think that's a little bit better than Sam Gagner or a Riley Sheahan. Wouldn't you agree? These Toronto forwards are just plain and simple better than the Oilers forwards. At least, well, they're not better than 2 of the Oilers forwards, but the rest you could kind of make an argument for, and that's what I'm trying to hint at here. A move like this makes sense for the Oilers because they would be addressing some of their needs. Forward depth. It's been a problem all year. McDavid and Draisaitl have over 70 points each. And the next highest scoring player is Nugent Hopkins with 31 points. The rest kind of trails off after you go past the Neils, the Nurses, and the Chase-Ons. It's not a good depth scoring team for this Edmonton squad. So it's understandable why they would want to acquire some other good forwards. So here's that fourth reason as to why the Toronto Maple Leafs would be on the Oilers' radar is because of the Oilers' speed. And this is one thing that I really had to dig deep and try to understand what I was talking about. Because the first thing that was clicking in my head when I was thinking about this list, speed, 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 I am speed. 1 winner, 42 losers. I eat losers for breakfast. That kind of thing. But I was thinking, what about speed is so important? And I thought about it and I was like, Kasperi Kapanen is an absolute bullet out there. Imagine this guy playing with McDavid. Now, there's no disrespect to Kasperi Kapanen in the slightest. I love Cappy, he's a good player, he's really fast, works really hard. We all know that. But imagine Kapanen playing with a guy who could probably match him in terms of speed. Match him or maybe even go past him in Connor McDavid. That's not me trying to imply that, moving Zach Kassian down the lineup is the good thing to do. Because Kassian has been good for the Oilers, but he is suspended. And he is in a position where he isn't necessarily the best player out there on that team. In fact, I could probably name 3 or 4 guys on the forward core who I think are probably a little bit better than Kassian. Kapanen would be a guy that I would do that with. And having him try out the wing with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl sounds like a good shot to me. Same with Andreas Johnsson. That guy's a lethal offensive threat. The guy's only averaging 16 minutes of ice time per night. He's listed on the first line with Matthews and Marner. But Matthews and Marner, those guys got 20 minutes of ice time per night. So Andreas Johnsson, despite having the deployment, is not being given the minutes, in my opinion. And give him a little bit more, especially with some really good players, and I think there's a lot more to get out of this player. Earlier we talked about how the Toronto Maple Leafs have what the Oilers would probably want, and that's forward depth. Well, the fifth and final reason as to why the Oilers would be targeting the Leafs is because the Oilers kinda have what the Leafs would probably want, and that's defensive depth in the future. Now, the Oilers don't really have anybody who I think they would be willing to part with today on the back end. I don't see a Darnell Nurse getting traded for a Kapanen. That's not what I'm trying to say here. I don't really see Clefbaum as that guy either. But what I do see in the Oilers depth chart are guys that the Maple Leafs would probably be interested in. You want right-handed defensemen? Well, here's a guy named Evan Bouchard. He's an Ontario guy. He's pretty good. You want left-handed defensemen? There's a guy named Philip Broberg over there in the depth chart of Edmonton. He's looking pretty solid too. A very high ceiling, low floor kind of player, but the potential is there. In my opinion, it would be foolish for the Oilers to not at least try to go deep in the playoffs this year. Because if you're unwilling to trade a guy like Broberg and Bouchard because, look at what they can become down the future. If you guys in Edmonton are not competitive and not in the Stanley Cup contention by the time McDavid is 25, honestly, you guys have failed McDavid, and that's a whole nother topic for another day. If you have the chance to sit down and wait for Philip Broberg and Evan Bouchard to become great in the NHL, without making the playoffs in the process during that time span, you've failed McDavid, plain and simple. This team needs to find a way to get into the playoffs now. McDavid has given you 2 300-point seasons already, and you guys have only beaten one playoff team in the past 5 years, pretty much. So, in my opinion, it's worth exploring the idea. And we know the Leafs love their defensive prospects. Look at how the fan base cherishes a guy like Rasmus Sandin. And Nick Robertson, who is also a defenseman. That's a joke, by the way. So, that's how I see it. Those are 5 reasons why the Edmonton Oilers would be willing to explore a trade with the Toronto Maple Leafs for Kapanen, Johnsson, or Alexander Kerfoot. Hope you enjoyed this video. Social Life Trust 99. And bye.